My name is Emily Parker, and this is the story of the night my own family pretended I did not exist. I had arrived early, walking across the polished stone entrance of a military hall, dressed in a plain jacket and slacks. In my hand was my ID, and behind me hung the weight of years of silence and strained dinners. I expected at least a seat, a small place among my family. But the moment the guard lowered his voice and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't on the list," I knew the truth. This was no mistake. I stood there, ID still in my hand, trying to breathe past the sudden knot in my chest. The young soldier looked embarrassed, shifting his weight, as if he wished he could let me pass. His tone was polite but final, the kind of voice that carried no room for hope. The laughter from inside spilled through the doors, the sound of glasses clinking, and familiar voices honoring a legacy that apparently did not include me. A black car pulled up to the curb, and I did not need to look twice to recognize it. My brother Jacob stepped out first, tall and glowing in his formal whites, smiling like the star of the evening. My mother adjusted her pearls, eyes already shining with pride, and then my father followed, walking with that same rigid stride that had always filled every room he entered. They looked at me once, or maybe through me, before turning back to each other. Jacob whispered something to his wife, and her laughter carried straight in my direction. The guard cleared his throat, almost apologizing again, but I couldn't hear him anymore. My pulse was in my ears. I stayed rooted to the spot, an uninvited guest at my own father's retirement celebration and my brother's promotion. The marble floor beneath my shoes felt colder with every second. I thought about asking my father why, but I already knew the answer. He didn't see me as part of this story. He never had. I tightened my grip on my bag, swallowed the sting in my throat, and let the moment sink in. I had been invisible in this family my whole life, but this night was different. This time, I wasn't going to leave quietly. I grew up in Texas, in a house where the walls carried the smell of polished boots and starched uniforms. My father, General Robert Parker, believed discipline was love, and silence was respect. He carried himself with a presence so heavy that even laughter at the dinner table felt out of place, unless it came from him. My mother hovered at his side, softening his sharpness when she could, but the rhythm of our home was set by him and him alone. From the time we were little, Jacob was the golden child. He was loud, athletic, and born to fit the story my father wanted to tell. Photos in our living room always seemed to tilt toward him, his smile wide, his hand gripping a baseball bat or holding a trophy. I was there too, but usually off to the side or cropped at the edge of the frame. When relatives came over, they pointed to Jacob's medals from school sports and called him a future officer. I cannot recall anyone ever asking what I wanted to be. Dinner conversations were the same. My father would ask Jacob about practice, about drills, about the future he was already mapping out for him. When it was my turn, I would start to share something small, like a test score or a book I was excited about. But his eyes would already be on Jacob. The nods and the questions were never for me. I became skilled at eating quietly, listening, and pretending it did not sting. One year, in middle school, I won a state science competition. My project had taken me months, endless hours in the garage, late nights tinkering until my hands shook from exhaustion. I came home holding the certificate and medal, proud and nervous, ready to see even a flicker of pride in his eyes. He glanced at it once, gave a short nod, and then asked Jacob how football practice had gone. I held the medal in my lap that night, the shine dimming under the weight of his indifference. The family photos tell the story better than words. At Jacob's high school graduation, my father stood tall with his arm around him, smiling in a way I had never seen directed at me. I was in the background, half turned, holding my own diploma with no one reaching for it. At family holidays, Jacob sat at the head of the table, even before he commissioned, while I filled the quiet space at the end. These were not accidents. They were patterns, repeated over and over until they felt normal. There were moments when I told myself it did not matter, that I was fine being invisible. But deep down, I wanted him to look at me and see more than an afterthought. I wanted him to ask about my achievements with the same pride he poured into Jacob's smallest wins. Instead, he drew a line between us so early and so firmly that I spent most of my childhood trying to cross it. My mother noticed sometimes, though she rarely said much. I caught her eyes on me once, when my father praised Jacob at dinner for scoring a touchdown. She looked as if she wanted to say something, but then she lowered her gaze. Her silence felt like agreement, even if it wasn't. That silence became another layer of the wall between us. Looking back, it was not just about favoritism. It was about erasure. Jacob was the son who carried the name, the one who would inherit the story my father had written for himself. I was the daughter who was expected to cheer from the sidelines, useful only when quiet. That was the role they carved out for me. And for years, I lived inside it. The truth is, I never wanted to be Jacob. I did not need the trophies or the spotlight. What I wanted was simpler. I wanted to be seen, to have my efforts recognized as real, as worthy. But in the Parker household, worth was measured by how closely you matched my father's vision of himself. And in his eyes, Jacob was the reflection. I was just the shadow. When I signed my enlistment papers, I did it quietly. I didn't tell my father, my mother, or Jacob. I didn't want to see the look in their eyes if I failed, or the smirk on my brother's face if he found out. I packed my bag, boarded a bus, and decided that if I was going to build a life of service, it would be on my own terms. From the first day of basic training, I felt the weight of being underestimated. The instructors barked louder at me than at the others, as if testing how much a woman could take. Some of the recruits whispered that I would never make it past the first month. I heard the jokes, the snickers, the doubts that clung to me every time I lined up in uniform. But I learned to thrive in that doubt. I pushed myself harder than anyone expected. While others relied on brute strength, I focused on endurance and precision. I studied procedures until I could run them in my sleep. I memorized signals and tactics that others shrugged off. Quietly, step by step, I built a reputation as the one who never broke, never quit, and never forgot the details. It wasn't easy. There were nights when my body ached so badly, I thought I wouldn't move again. My hands blistered, my lungs burned, and my mind screamed at me to stop. But every morning, I showed up. I forced myself to be sharper, faster, more disciplined. I refused to give anyone the satisfaction of saying I didn't belong. When I chose the intelligence track, some thought it was a soft option. They imagined I would be sitting behind a desk, filing reports. They had no idea how brutal the work really was. Hours buried in data, learning to see threats before they surfaced, piecing together patterns that could decide whether soldiers lived or died. It required a different kind of strength, one that didn't shout or swagger, but it mattered just as much. I remember the first time my commanding officer called me the Watchtower. He said I saw things before anyone else did. That name spread quietly, not as a joke but as respect. It was the first time I felt recognized not for being loud or flashy, but for being precise and relentless. Back home, no one knew. My family never asked about my assignments, and I stopped offering details. But inside the military, I was carving out a place that was mine. I was proving myself in silence, earning victories that no one could take away. For the first time, I felt the ground under my feet was steady, even if my family would never see it. My career took me into places that never made the news. I worked in windowless rooms where the air smelled of burnt coffee and recycled ventilation, where screens lit up with shifting maps and endless streams of data. Our victories were measured in the absence of headlines, in the disasters that never happened. No parades, no cameras, just a quiet acknowledgement in classified reports that disappeared into locked cabinets. One mission stays burned into my memory. I was on shift when I noticed a series of delays in GPS signals, flowing through a relay. At first glance, they looked like harmless glitches, the kind everyone ignores. But something in the rhythm felt wrong, and I dug deeper. The more I traced it, the clearer it became. A hostile actor was setting up a spoofing attack, one that would reroute a destroyer group straight into a mined corridor. That destroyer was the one my brother Jacob was serving on. He never knew how close he came to dying that night. I worked 30 hours straight with my team to isolate the interference, mask the delay, and redirect the fleet in time. The mines were avoided, the mission went on, and a week later, my parents posted a photo of Jacob smiling on the deck of that very ship. My mother wrote that God must have been watching over him. I almost replied that maybe it was his sister, but I deleted the words before they left my screen. That was not the only time. I coordinated drone diversions to save trapped teams, intercepted signals that prevented ambushes, and unraveled networks that would have sparked international incidents. Each success meant lives spared, men and women who went home because of a decision I made at a console in the middle of the night. Yet every Christmas letter from my parents read the same line. Jacob was excelling in command, and Emily was still working hard. There was pride in what I did, pride that no one could take from me, but it was laced with bitterness. To my family, I was a clerk in a quiet office, someone who filled out forms, while the real soldiers carried the weight. They never asked what my work meant, never tried to understand. The truth was too far from the story they wanted to tell. I stopped expecting recognition from them, but the ache of being unseen never left. My victories were silent, hidden behind clearance levels and sealed doors. They were mine alone, and in the end, they were enough to keep me going, even if the people I loved most chose to pretend they did not exist. The night of the ceremony, I arrived early, hoping to slip in unnoticed. I wore a tan coat over simple clothes, nothing that would stand out. My ID felt heavy in my hand as I stepped toward the main entrance. The building itself looked like a monument, flags lined along the marble steps, and chandeliers glowing through tall windows. It was a place built to honor service, yet I already felt like an intruder. The young officer at the door scanned my card, then checked his tablet again. His lips tightened before he looked up, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't on the list." For a moment, I just stood there, waiting for someone to correct him. My father was only a few feet away, shaking hands with guests. He had heard, but he turned his head toward the lobby, pretending to study the decor. My mother brushed past me without a word, her pearls catching the light as she hurried to join him. Jacob followed behind, his white uniform shining, his expression smug. He met my eyes and smiled the way you do at someone who lost a game they were foolish enough to play. Then he leaned toward his wife and whispered. She laughed softly, the sound drifting right into my chest. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could undo the moment. But rules were rules, and he was just following them. I gave a small nod, forcing my face to stay calm even as the sting burned behind my ribs. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag, and I turned away from the hall, where applause and voices swelled. I walked across the lot to my car, each step steady. I opened the trunk and pulled out the garment bag I had folded with care. Inside was my full dress uniform, pressed and perfect, with 2 silver stars gleaming at the shoulders. I laid it across the seat, smoothing the fabric with deliberate hands. There was no trembling, no rush, only focus. They had erased me from their list, but I was not here to ask for permission. I was here to remind them who I truly was, and this time, they would see me. I walked back through the entrance, this time in full dress whites. The air shifted as soon as the doors opened, and I felt the weight of silence press against the sound of laughter inside. My shoes tapped against the polished floor. Each step measured, my shoulders squared, the 2 silver stars catching the light. Heads began to turn. Conversations faltered. No one expected me to return like this. The ceremony was already in motion. My brother stood at the podium, his voice strong and polished as he spoke about legacy. Then he smiled and said, "I invite all Parker officers to the front row." He expected no one else to move but himself and our father. A ripple of confusion spread through the hall as I stepped forward. Murmurs rose, uncertain, as the crowd struggled to place me. It started with a single voice, clear and commanding. "General Parker, front row." Then another, and another. Suddenly, 200 soldiers were on their feet. They stood in unison, back straight, their voices booming through the hall. "General Parker! Front row!" The sound exploded, shaking the room, cutting through the music and the speeches. I kept walking, calm and steady, while the crowd shifted around me. Chairs scraped against the floor as men and women made way. Some gasped, some whispered, but the soldiers did not waver. They knew who I was. They had read my briefings, fought under my watch, lived because of the decisions I made in silence. Their salute was not to the daughter or the sister who had been overlooked. It was to the officer who had carried them through battles they never spoke of in public. My mother's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father froze mid-toast, the glass still in his hand. Jacob stared as if the ground beneath him had shifted, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. I did not look at them. I kept my gaze forward, moving through the aisle. As the chants filled every corner of the hall, I reached the front row and took my seat, not behind them, not beside them, but ahead. The soldiers' voices faded into a heavy silence that felt louder than any applause. In that moment, I did not need to speak. The truth had already been declared for me. When the applause faded and the music returned to its gentle hum, I stood alone near the back of the hall. Guests moved in clusters, their eyes still darting toward me, whispering about what they had just witnessed. I felt their stares, but I did not chase them. I let the weight of the moment settle. The silence that once haunted me, now working in my favor. My father was the first to approach. His steps were slower than usual, his posture less rigid. For once, he did not look like the general who commanded rooms. He looked like a man searching for the right words. He stopped in front of me, his eyes locked on the stars at my shoulders, and then lifted to my face. "You make this country proud," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like the words had been dragged from deep inside him. He paused, swallowing hard before adding, "And you made me proud too. I just didn't know how to say it." For years I had imagined this moment, playing it out in my mind with anger, sarcasm, or tears. Instead, I felt calm. I gave a small nod and answered, "It matters more now because I don't need it anymore." His jaw tightened, as if the truth stung, but he gave a single, steady nod back. Jacob came next, no swagger in his walk. He looked dazed, like someone had pulled the rug out from under his entire life. His eyes swept over my uniform again and again, as if he couldn't accept what it meant. Finally, he asked, "How long have you outranked me?" 15 years, I replied, my voice even. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He let out a slow breath and shook his head. "I spent my life trying to be first," he said, "and I never realized you were already leading." There was no bitterness in his tone, just awe mixed with regret. My mother lingered behind them, her hands twisting together, her eyes wet. When she finally stepped forward, she didn't say anything at first. She just wrapped her arms around me, holding on as if she had been waiting years to do it. Her voice trembled against my shoulder. "I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry." I held her gently and whispered, "It's enough that you're here now." She pulled back, her face soft and open in a way I had rarely seen. For the first time in decades, we stood together not as a family divided into favorites and shadows, but as people finally facing the truth. It was fragile, and it would take time to heal. But in that moment, the silence that once erased me gave way to recognition. Justice had come late, but it had come, and that was enough. For most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, someday, my family would finally see me. I chased approval like it was oxygen, measuring my worth by their silence. Standing in that hall, I realized I no longer needed their permission to know who I was. But acknowledgement still matters, not because it defines us, but because it closes wounds we carry too long. Hearing my father's words, feeling my mother's embrace, and watching my brother's eyes open to the truth gave me the peace I had stopped waiting for. It reminded me that even when you no longer need validation, being recognized can still heal something deep inside. If you have ever felt invisible, I want you to know that your story matters. The work you do, the love you give, the quiet battles you fight every day, they all have weight. Even if no one claps for you, even if your name is left off the list, the truth of who you are cannot be erased. There will come a day when what you have carried in silence will be seen, maybe not by the people you wanted most, but by those who understand the value of your strength. And when that day comes, you will not need to shout. You will simply stand, and the world will recognize you. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell your own story. Let others know they are not alone. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the reminder that even in silence, we are never unseen.